Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our very first Digging Deep webinar of the year 2022. We have a really exciting lineup of webinars planned for this year, so we hope you share Digging Deep with anyone you know who could benefit from the information we will be covering this year. For today's webinar, we're talking about community. More specifically, we are talking about the benefits of finding our own niche community spaces for supporting our mental and emotional health. We will also be talking about how we can make mental health more available and less stigmatized by meeting young people in those spaces. But before we get into that, I'm so excited to introduce our guest expert joining us today, Mary Stowe with Anime for Humanity, a fellow nonprofit that I've gotten to know recently. So Mary, could you describe your role at Anime for Humanity and what the group's mission is?
So Anime for Humanity is a nonprofit organization, and we are dedicated to challenging the stigma surrounding mental health and creating mental health awareness through things like anime, manga, cosplay, and video games. I am one of the directors, and while I'm not a mental health professional, I am a mental health advocate. So I do believe strongly in, again, challenging those stigmas, creating open conversations, positive conversations about mental health. And a lot of our volunteers are the same way. So when I first joined Anime for Humanity, I started as a graphic designer, actually, and then I just kind of grown as the nonprofit has grown, and now I'm a director who oversees multiple teams.
That's awesome, and thank you for sharing more about yourself. So to get the conversation started about today's topic, let's talk about social connection. It's a fact of life that humans are very social creatures. We crave that feeling of being connected to others, whether it be by hobbies, beliefs, or whatever else is in the forefront of our thoughts in the day-to-day life, because we all have something that's really important to us. Some people, have church meetings during the week. Some people have clubs. Some people have book clubs, anything like that. And for anyone who enjoys those kinds of things in groups, they will probably agree with me when I say finding your community is a great resource in your life through all its twists and turns. Like you can rely on the stability that comes with, every Thursday you can plan on meeting up with your friends to do this certain thing. And it doesn't matter what age we are, people of all ages need and crave community. Kids, teens, adults, seniors, we all need to feel that family away from family. One big source of connection for many people, especially young people, is fandom communities. I know we have a lot of parents and caregivers that tune into our webinars, and they may not be familiar with what a fandom is, or maybe they know what it is, they've just never used this term before. So, but just to cover all our bases, a fandom is a community built around a shared love for a particular aspect of pop culture. So like a book series, movies, video games, sports can technically be called a fandom under that kind of line of thinking. But an easily recognizable example is like Star Trek or Star Wars. Like, back when I was growing up, my parents were super into Star Trek. They went to the conventions and stuff. So that's an example that might be easily recognized. And a very popular fandom as a whole, which we will be referring to mostly in this webinar, but a lot of the advice we're giving today goes for all fandoms, but this one in particular is the anime community. So Mary, a lot of what you do for Anime for Humanity takes place at conventions. For listeners here who have never been to a pop culture convention before, can you briefly describe what you might see at one and what they're like?
Ooh. I'm trying to think back to like my first time going to one, because I didn't get to go to one actually till I was in college. There's a lot, like even the smaller ones, it's kind of a sensory overload at first, but in a positive way, because all of a sudden you're seeing cosplayers, you're seeing art, you're seeing the schedule that might be posted for like panels with topics that you're interested in. There's booths where you can shop. There's even like booths that have like maybe different snack foods that you've seen in your anime. It's like, oh, I get to try like a nice like tasty treat like while I'm here. So kind of, like I said, a little overwhelming, but it's so much fun. And once you're in there, once you kind of take that deep breath and like plunge right into the crowd, you'll start to find your people, your group, your niche. You'll see like a really nice piece of art of like your favorite character. Maybe it's even like a minor character, but all of a sudden you're seeing people who love that character the same way that you do. It's like, oh, they only are in the episode like twice, but they really stuck out to you and they mean something to other people as well.
That's awesome. And when you said the overstimulating part about the conventions, I I definitely feel that every time I've been to one, no matter if it's one I've been to twice, like
Mhm.
several years apart, like I will never remember how to get around those buildings because there's so many
Oh yeah.
booths. You need a map. Like if
Yeah.
you ever go to one with your teenager, don't throw away that booklet with the map. You're gonna
Yeah,
need it.
keep the map, download the app on your phone. I like the printed maps though, because sometimes cell service can be spotty.
Yeah, I like to shove them in my pocket and it's all wrinkled
Mhm.
by the end, but at least I have it.
Yeah.
So at Anime for Humanity, do you guys only go to anime conventions or do you go to other kinds of events as well?
We've attended other types of conventions as well, usually ones that are, of course, centered around anime. We've been to a couple more Comic-Con centered ones, some video game centered ones like QuakeCon. Basically, anything that we feel like either has our audience or might share a similar audience. There does tend to be a little bit of anime overlap between like the comic book fans and the video game fans as well.
Awesome. And especially video games and anime tend to cross a lot because
Hmm.
a lot of games are based off shows and stuff these
Right.
days. Um, but off camera, when we talked last time, you shared with me about what you guys do as a group is your anime therapy kits. Can you talk to us about that? Like that's something I
Yes.
really would love to share.
Yes. So when we have a booth at a convention, we are passing out our anime therapy kits for free. They are 100% free. You can come pick one up. And basically, they're just this package of goodies. We have like a poster, a bookmark, an anime themed fortune cookie. So, like some fun stuff. But then also a lot of mental health resources as well, like hotline numbers, websites, text numbers, anime recommendations. So it's a nice kind of packet of everything you could possibly need and like where to find us, like on Discord and on social media to start, making online connections. So even whenever you're not at a convention, you can still carry on those friendships and relationships.
That's awesome. And I originally found Anime for Humanity on Twitter when someone had shared a picture of their anime therapy kit. And I was like, what is this? And that's how I found you guys.
Nice.
And I just love that you guys are sharing this. And that's why, so my next little bit I want to cover is like why I was so excited to bring Mary on for this webinar. And I'm going to totally out myself here, but I'm a huge anime fan. Even before we started recording, Mary and I were sitting here talking like, what are you watching lately? But so as someone who grew up in like the early 2000s when anime wasn't as normal or I guess as accepted as it is now, it really makes me happy that there's a group out there doing what you guys are doing because like I was in middle school like circa 2006 and at the time anyone who liked shows coming out of Japan and Korea, anime was kind of bunched in with like we were the awkward kids running around like
Mhm.
ninjas during lunch. And if you happen to be like if you were if you were in that group or you had friends in that group, you were kind of automatically like labeled or kind of sort of you didn't fit in. And that's just, I
Mhm.
mean, no teenager feels like they fit in, but it was especially like if you watched anime and you wanted to fit in, you kind of just didn't tell people when I was growing up at the school I went to. So, which is a really strange comparison to now because I've met people who are my parents' age who watch anime now. It's just another television show these days. And with mental health having been really stigmatized up until the past few years, our little fandom groups didn't really talk about mental health because we were already kind of like, okay, we're already a little stigmatized. We were the oddballs. So to go like, hey, I also have depression would have kind of put an even bigger target on us as the kind of awkward kids in middle
Mhm.
school. So, and I've got this little bit of neuroscience to kind of talk about to lead up to why looking back that's totally crazy that we weren't talking about mental health in those safe spaces for us as kids because so in November 2020 there were researchers that conducted a study where they had participants either fast and not eat for 10 hours or they were isolated from social interaction for 2 hours and they actually found that there was a similar response in the brain of those who were isolated from social interaction to those who had not eaten during that span of 10 hours. And it's as if like it turns out that the human brain craves social interactions in a similar way to how our brain reacts when we're hungry.
Mhm.
So it's like you're literally hungry to talk to people,
Yeah.
to connect with another human being. And another study found that people also experience social exclusion in the same area of the brain that we experience physical pain, which is absolutely like, I love neuroscience. Sorry, I could go on forever. But and there was yet another study in the University of Michigan that found that a low sense of belonging is a strong predictor for depression. A lot of this might seem obvious, but when you look back on that now, really thinking about that information, it's really strange to think that in these groups where kids and teens feel safe to identify with each other and to enjoy their passions with each other, and like they have that little niche, it's a totally missed opportunity to not be using that as a safe space to open up those mental health conversations. And so my next question for you, Mary, is, as someone who wishes you guys were around as that when I was a kid, and as someone who is constantly inspired by my own work in the mental health and nonprofit sphere, I got to ask about if there are any memorable experiences you've had when sharing your mental health resources with the young people at these conventions.
It's the experience as a whole is super memorable. I always tell our new volunteers that if they're able to get to a booth at one of the conventions with us, they have to do it, because it really is an experience that's hard to put into words, because we just talked about how like conventions are a little bit of a sensory overload. Like there's so much going on, there's so many people, there's so many booths, there's so much to look at, see, and do. And then all of a sudden there's our booth, and we have this big banner that says, let's talk about mental health. Let's, challenging the stigma surrounding mental health, Anime for Humanity. And people kind of pause and they're like, like, what is this? And then they come up, they learn about us, they see what we're doing, what we're about, what our goals are, what our mission is. And the walls just come down. Like, it's fascinating almost to like see how all of a sudden people are just so comfortable talking, because they're like, someone's here to listen to me, someone wants to hear my story, someone wants to hear about my good days and my bad days. And like people get really raw, really open there at the booth. And there's a lot of hugs that happens too. Like if people are like comfortable with hugs, I'm like, I'm a hugger, I will come up around this booth and give you a hug. But
We have to mention this is pre-COVID, just so.
yeah, this is that's what I miss. I'm like, let me back at cons where I can hug people.
Imagine you've had to, like, when you're hugging someone who's in like full body face paint, try not to get like blue or purple on your,
or like they
your
have
clothes.
the giant suit of armor, so it's kind of like reaching around these big broad shoulders.
But you're gonna give them that hug.
Yeah, they're gonna get that hug. But that's, I think, one of the most memorable things, and it's happened a lot. Like I can't think of just a handful of instances where that's happened. Like it happens a lot where people just, they get really open and really comfortable, and I think that's amazing.
I guess that just shows, like, when you can identify with another human being and you see that you guys have very similar interests, it's just easier to get that conversation started. So I want to mention that for the next point, and I mentioned it before, but I want to discuss what we're about to discuss is kind of outside of the context of COVID. Like we aren't going to these big events and gatherings right now, obviously. But so let's say, however long in the future, wherever this is, these next few weeks are going, but let's say COVID isn't so prominent and big events and gatherings are possible again. And maybe you have a kid or a grandkid, niece or nephew, whatever, your teenager has been begging you to buy them a pass to some kind of pop culture convention like Comic-Con or anime conventions, whatever. And you think it's kind of weird. You don't really get anime. You're not really sold on the idea of your kid going to this thing. We actually wanted to share some of the ways that these communities are beneficial to young people when it's their niche. So if you're on the fence, here are some ways that fandoms and conventions can actually be a huge source of mental health support for young people. My first point is that finding others with similar passions and hobbies decreases of feelings of social exclusion and promotes feelings of belonging. Because let's face it, teens already feel like they don't belong. Like it's just, even the most popular kid probably struggles to not feel like they belong. It kind of comes with the territory of becoming an adult. And so finding a place where you feel like you do belong can help ease that loneliness. This kind of goes back to that really interesting study finding that I mentioned earlier, how feelings of social exclusion is in the same part of the brain as feeling pain. Well, finding your group where you feel like you belong just kind of will not hurt, because loneliness is painful. Everyone's experienced loneliness at some point. And then the next topic I have is finding your tribe. Basically, finding your tribe is a wonderfully welcome retreat, especially in a world that's constantly divided over different things, whether it's politics or beliefs or personal life choices. It's just, in a world that's already so divided, how awesome it is to have a place where a young person can be with people that they have something in common with. So that's kind of healing in a way for a lot of people. And we've all felt that when we finally find like a person who we identify with, we're like, just like when Mary and I logged onto this call, we sat there, we talked about anime at first. I was like, oh, and it helped me not be so nervous about recording this. And what I love about these fandom communities is there are some toxic side to this, but like everything, but the connections you make in these fandoms don't necessarily end when the convention leaves town, but it can move online. And teens have already had to learn how to kind of fill their social tanks while we've been home with COVID through social media. A lot of friends play games together online. A lot of friends will, do Zoom, things like that. And fandoms have been online for a while, but even before COVID came and forced us all home, these people, like I've made a friend online in a fandom community before, and we've been talking for years. I met him at a convention. It was a animation convention in college, but we're still friends like all these years later. So it's people get that support keeps going. It's not just during those fandoms, those fandom conventions. And then getting together and expressing yourself creatively, either through cosplay or some people will go and share their art at these conventions. It helps promote a sense of joy, which is an obvious benefit. And I don't know if anybody has ever been to here listening has been to a convention and actually like seen people in cosplay, but their joy is just contagious. Mary, you've probably experienced this too. When you see all these people like going, oh my God, you're dressed up as so-and-so, I'm dressed up as the counterpart. Or when two people are dressed as the same character and they're like, I love how you did that. I love how you did that on your costume.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's contagious. It feels so good to see them smiling and taking
even
pictures.
Just like you recognizing the character that someone is, it's like, oh, you're Bakugo from My Hero Academia. They're like, yeah, like you recognize me. Like they're like, I did it right. I did a good job. Like, immediately like which character I am. And I love cosplayers.
It's always fun too when there are people who are dressed up from the same show, but they were enemies in the show, and they'll get all these fun like photo ops with each other of them pretending to fight, but it's all in good fun. And it's oh my gosh, like I'm just happy. I'm feeling bubbly thinking about when I've seen that at conventions. It's like, yeah, cosplay isn't for me. I personally don't have the energy to commit to it. That takes a lot of commitment. There's some intense, like people 3D print these things, but the joy I feel just watching them is contagious. And then this is interesting. So participating in something that they enjoy and are passionate about, it helps young people find and learn more about themselves as individuals. I actually read this interview with Teen Vogue magazine. They published their own article about the mental health benefits of fandoms and conventions. Nice. Psychotherapist Lisa Bahar said, during adolescence, teens are going through a time where they are forming their identity in the world. It is normal and healthy for teens to align and connect more and more with their peers than their parents. This is a wonderful process that helps teens learn how they rely less on their parents and more on themselves for healthy decision-making as they become adults. And that's something like teenagers are, if anyone here is a parent dealing with a teenager right now, I assume you're going through the growing pains of them kind of deciding they don't want to do things that you did the way you do it, or they are like, no, I like these things instead of these things. And that's hard for a parent, but it's also hard for a teen. And when they can go and do something they're passionate about with others who have similar interests, it helps them not feel so alone, because not every teen can come to their parent about every single thing. Because, okay, I remember being really interested in a certain TV show when I was a teenager, and I came home with my mom and I'm like, okay, I got to tell you about this thing I learned about this character. And she's like, I don't know what that is. So, so when a teenager has friends that have similar interests, it it helps them get that out of their system, I guess is the best way to say it. We want to talk about that thing, you know? So we are already promoting mental wellness in these spaces, even without us having those really blunt conversations like, you know, let's talk about mental health, or are you depressed kind of conversations. And if we were to do if we were to do what Anime for Humanity is doing by meeting young people where they are, you know, participating in these fandoms with other kinds of pop culture communities, imagine how great our next generation would be prepared for whatever life throws their way. And I was just wondering, Mary, what's the typical reaction you get from people who receive your kits? Like, I know you were talking about hugging, and but I know you and I had talked about an experience you had where a dad had brought his daughter to your booth.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you could tell us about that.
Yes. Well, the big reaction is like, oh my God, this is like a free resource. It's like, yes, of course. Take one, take two, take one for your friend. But one time at one of the booths that I was working at, a dad had brought his daughter. And I think he was kind of a dad who was being supportive, doesn't know a whole lot about anime and conventions, but he brought his teenage daughter and a group of her friends, and they were off kind of doing their own thing at the moment. But he stopped by our booth and was like, I really need to bring my daughter here, you know? I think she really needs to like know that this is an option because I'm her dad. She's not going to talk to me about like the bad day she's had, if she's feeling depressed, if she's feeling anxious, you know, she's talking to her friends about those sort of things. So when he found her and her friends, we of course all gave them, you know, their kids, and we just kind of had like a small conversation with them about like who we are, what we do. And the dad was just, I think he felt a little bit relieved, you know, that there's a safe space for his daughter and like her friends and maybe like other young family members that he has to come talk about the good days, but they also have a place to talk about the bad days as well.
And in your when I was checking out your anime therapy kits on your website, I also came across your blog. I love the blogs you guys had. There was one about like examples of mental health in anime. And I imagine that girl went home and read those too, and she's like, oh, now I really identify with these characters. But I love that story. And I'm sorry, I totally called you out and I was like, can you tell it again?
No, you're fine.
But and I was just, so if you were to have like the same conversation with someone in a different setting than a convention or something, and it was just kind of out and about, or like even if it was someone you knew but it was like in a classroom kind of setting, do you find that people may not be as receptive as it would be in like these really fun convention atmospheres? Like as many people, especially people who have tuned into our webinars for a very long time, mental health has been heavily stigmatized for a very long time, and it's kind of just now becoming easier to talk about for a lot of people. Do you think that it makes people more receptive to make it kind of more fun and lighthearted in these kind of ways?
I think the setting of it definitely could have a big effect for some people. Because like you said, like if maybe like we come to a classroom setting where we're talking to students while they're at school may not be their favorite place. It wasn't my favorite place all the time, definitely as a teenager or preteen. But a convention is somewhere where they chose to go. They chose to go be there. They're excited to be there. They're happy to be there. So I definitely think having these resources and information available in the convention type setting, where there's so much positivity, just kind of reinforces that like, hey, we're here for you. We want to be another positive force in your life. And I think they could be more receptive to hearing the possibility of having those deeper conversations later on if they need to.
That's awesome. I feel like this is a good time to mention that you guys ship out anime therapy kits.
We do.
Could you tell us like how, if there was like a school counselor who wanted to get a hold of some of these for their students, could you mention a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. We do have a pause on them at the moment. We're redoing them. We're getting ready. The kind of silver lining of the pandemic is we've been able to kind of pause, revamp, rewind, reevaluate everything. So we're not shipping kits at this time, but there is a form on our website, animeforhumanity.org, where you can go fill out the little questionnaire, fill out the little form, and express that you are interested and we've sent a lot of kits to anime clubs at local libraries, to schools. We have counselors and psychologists who request them to give them to their patients. So that is something that we do as well at no cost. It is all free.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Because I know there are probably a lot of therapists who specialize in treating teens, and they've probably heard from their patients that, they like anime, and that would be perfect for, like, that'll be perfect for this one client, So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. I imagine that will help a lot of people. And there's one more point I wanted to touch on. I know we went through this webinar a little faster than we usually do. We try to make them an hour. I got a little overexcited to have Mary on, and I over-prepared, and now I've gone through too fast. So, but I do want to mention at this point, if anyone ever has any questions or comments that they would like to pass on to Mary or to any guest expert or to us, like feedback, you can always email us at feedback@shadowsedge.com. And for my next point, I wanted to talk about how, as supportive as these communities can be, just like all things in the world, there are going to be occasional people who want to spoil the fun, and they might be unkind or malicious, whether it be in comments or just that. We've all experienced that.
Yeah.
And there can be some toxicity to fandoms when it goes from being passionate about something to being flat out obsessed. And, an example of this could be like a few years ago, there was a TV show where these fans started harassing one of the actors in the show because the final episode of the series didn't go the way they had wanted. I believe it was Game of Thrones when that happened.
Okay.
And yeah, and that's where fandoms turn toxic. It also can be toxic even just amongst themselves, not to like the people who lead these fandoms, essentially. Maybe someone might leave a comment about what they like about one character, and the other person's like, that's stupid. But in general, these communities are very supportive, but that's why it's still important to communicate with your kid or teen, whoever is in your life that is using this as a support system. It's important to communicate with them about things going on in their life. So that way, both in person and online, they know they can also come to you when that support system is disrupted, because it's good to have multiple facets to your mental health toolkit. So do know that there is a little bit of toxicity, but that's like everything in life. As far as we know, it could be happening at school with your friends in person too. So just have that conversation with your teen on how to, so that they know they can come to you.
Yeah. And like kind of on that subject too, something that like staff and our moderators for our Discord channel strive very hard to do is to kind of create a very nice, open conversation, but also how to, like, what's the right way to phrase it? You can have a disagreement without being aggressive, without, there's ways to have a discussion, have a disagreement. I like this character, I don't like this character. Well, why don't you like this character? I really like that character. There's ways to navigate those conversations without just making it personal, attacking somebody, kind of seeing it from their point of view, like, okay, like I can see why you may not like them for that reason. They're still my favorite character though, at the end of the day. Like, it's okay to not like the same characters, the same anime, the same manga,
And that's something I appreciate about Discord is when you join a group online, they make you accept the rules and read through them before you can join those conversations. Not that some people still will do it. Some people skim and then just click accept. But that's just something to be prepared for. But it honestly, if it happens, it's not usually that bad, I have to say.
And we usually have, like I said, like our volunteer moderators, they're able just to kind of like interject and be like, let's, reel it in just a little bit. Maybe everyone take a breath really quick, reread,
get a drink of water, take a walk.
Yeah, reread that sentence before you hit the send button,
Maybe that would be a good follow-up webinar to this discussion, is like protecting your mental wellness when someone says something hateful online. Maybe that might be good. But do you have any follow-up questions for me, Mary? I know we definitely went a lot faster with this webinar than past ones, but again, I over-prepared and I talked fast because I got excited. We've been preparing this since December, so I've been super excited to have you on here and to share you with our community.
Yeah. I guess like just kind of going back to like the conventions, like we're of course like monitoring like the current event situations of things. We're optimistic about maybe returning to cons in 2022. It's all of course going to just depend on the state of things like that's going on with current events with COVID. Um, but hopefully we'll be back out there at conventions soon. If anyone ever wants to request that we try to come to a specific city, we do have volunteers all over the country. We try to hit as many conventions as we can. We do a lot of West Coast ones, but we do have some that are in the more centralized part of the country and on the East Coast as well.
That's awesome. And if there's anyone who wants to become a volunteer, how would they do that?
They can reach out to us on Discord, on social media. There's also information on our website, animeforhumanity.org.
Awesome. And which that could be a really cool opportunity for any like college students looking to get volunteer hours and are passionate about mental health and anime. That actually could be a really cool way to get young people out there to fill those social tanks and to make a difference. So
yeah, and we do allow teens with parental consent. We do have a little consent form that we have to get signed. But we had a dad volunteer bring his daughter one time. She was, I think, 14, 15 years old. And he's like, can I bring her? I want her to see what it's like to volunteer for something. So
that's a really cool bonding thing too.
Yeah, like it was really cool because he clearly grew up with comic books, anime, like he was a fan and now she was a fan too. So it was really fun to see them like share that excitement.
But thank you so much. My final question for you is, what is the show you're watching right now? For anyone who is tuning in, if they want to share this podcast with their parents to convince them to get them a Crunchyroll subscription, they might want to know what show you're watching right now.
Yeah, so I'm currently watching season 2 of Demon Slayer. It's one of my favorites. I love the art, the music, the characters, the story. It gets a little heavy at times, but I really enjoy it. And then I'm also watching part 2 of the final season of Attack on Titan. The series is ending and it's really intense right now. There's a lot of action. And I don't know. I haven't read the manga, so I don't know how it's going to end.
It kind of makes me feel a little like aged because I remember when that show came out, I was a freshman in college. The second one you mentioned, Attack on Titan, and it's how many years has that been? That's been a while. Yeah. And so we had people who literally like would cry at season finales together. They had their little crying sessions together before class on the college campus in the dorms. And so like even like that kind of just supports the whole like the fandom supports each other outside of those conventions. Yeah. Sometimes it's in a dorm bathroom while your roommate's like, why did that character have to die? Sometimes it's like that, but it's kind of like it's beautiful in a way, in a really morbid way, to be able to know that like, hey, these people are really supportive of each other. And I just want to thank you for coming on. And again, if anybody has any questions or comments for Mary or for me, feedback for how we're doing on these webinars, we're also going to be putting this into podcast format. You can email us at feedback@shadowsedge.com. And I appreciate any feedback you have on how we could be doing this better or different, et cetera, et cetera. And thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.